Break Fix Podcast is all about capturing the living history of people from all over the autosphere, from wrench turners and racers to artists, authors, designers, and everything in between. Our goal is to inspire a new generation of petrolheads that wonder, how did they get that job or become that person? The road to success is paved by all of us because everyone has a story.
It's always interesting when you come across a fellow petrolhead, especially a Porsche enthusiast, while sitting across a boardroom table. Not long ago, our guest, Mark Porto, and I were killing time before a meeting and came to the realization that we were both car enthusiasts, and Mark has some really interesting stories to share.
Finding another petrolhead in the most unlikely of places is akin to a Highlander moment, or I guess in nowadays terms, your spidey senses goes off. I'm really excited to hear all these stories and see where this is going. So welcome to Break Fix, Mark.
Thank you. I'm thrilled and honored to be here.
So I got to start with the first question. Is it Porsche, Porsche, or Porsche? Which one is it?
It is Porsche and only Porsche, and will always be Porsche. My dad drilled that into my head when I was about 8 years old, and I think the first time I called it a Porsche, he said, we call them Porsches. And from that point on, it's been Porsche for me. And every time I hear it, I just kind of cringe.
That being said, you've teed it right up in the sense that you understand that Porsche started before the year 2000, much like Audi and some of these other German brands that are now at the front of our conversations in the petrolhead world. So how far back does your Porsche legacy go?
So my Porsche legacy goes back to about the time when I was, 8 or 9 years old. Like some of the folks in the space, I'm lucky because I was born into it. It was just, really, really interesting, to look back at, how I got indoctrinated into the petrolhead world. And ironically, my dad, when I was a little boy, he was building and racing quarter mile race cars, American Muscle, Chevelles, and that sort of stuff. Eventually, went from being a car builder and racer to a motor builder and for offshore power boats and for quarter mile cars. And then he got himself out of that and then became a BMW guy. And after that, he was a Porsche guy. So, about the time I was 8 years old was the first time that I ever had a 911 in my dad's garage and understood the quirks and the sounds and the smells of those cars and fell in love with them ever since.
Nothing quite like an air-cooled 911. So what year? Let's start with that. What type of 911?
The first 911 my dad owned was a 1972 911S. And nice. It was green. It was beautiful. He would, wax it and wash it with a diaper. Being a sports car guy and a gearhead, that car was outfitted with Weber carburetors before we knew it. It had a free-flowing, exhaust system before we knew it, and eventually, found its way into becoming a track sled. So I really understood the grunt of a 911, a flat six air-cooled motor. And as a little boy, there was absolutely nothing like it. I mean, I still remember the sounds of the door shutting and in that car and the smell that that car had. And
it's the smell of melting crayons, right? All old German cars.
Absolutely. And, but that was it for me. And I love BMWs. I like Ferraris. I always see, the new Audi R8s and I go, oh, that's a pretty cool car. But for me, 911s are really where it starts and ends for me.
So did you come up like I did and you actually had a VW in the family before there was a Porsche?
I did not. The first air-cooled motor, aside from a lawnmower that I ever had experience with was a flat six 3.2 liter 911 motor. And
nice.
and that was it. I like Volkswagens. A neighbor, even younger had one, and I never, forget looking at the, start and end of that motor. Like, that's it. That's all that's in there. And yeah, that's it. But for me, my real experience came with the 911s.
As our listeners have come to find out, I've hinted throughout various episodes that we were a VAG or Volkswagen Audi Group family for a very long time. We've had a VW in the family since the very early 60s, starting with my grandparents. And the curse has continued up until this point. And much like you, we didn't end up with a Porsche in the family until way later. And our first one was a 74 914. So, we're part of the mid-engine crowd, the ones that are shunned, the black sheep of the Porsche world. We're not going to talk about those 944 people, but, But no, it's cool. I mean, there's this camaraderie amongst us air-cooled guys, right? Where a lot of people did get their start with bugs and Carmen Gias and things like that, and finally evolved into 911s. And what's funny is you and I both grew up in a similar area of the DMV in kind of central Maryland. And that was a hotbed back, especially in the late 70s, early 80s for drag racing. You know, you had Coleman Brothers, which is now AutoFab. You had Sartwell's, which was a big Porsche place. You had the guys that were sponsoring the Bug Out way back when, which was held at the old Dominion Raceway. So there was a lot of this air-cooled community in the DMV, which is now, I would like to say, maybe evaporated a little bit, but I think it plays into your past a little bit more too. So let's talk about, you know, the evolution of your Porsche past and your dad's racing heritage.
I think it's a great story. So I grew up, you know, in Beltsville, Maryland, and my dad was a drag guy, and he and his friends. And I was young. So, you know, my memories and the sights and the sounds and the smells of those cars, you know, they really just evaporated to, you know, memories. Sometimes you think, oh, you know, it couldn't have been that cool, or there couldn't have been that many motors and that many cars around all the time. I was on Facebook one night, and there was this group, Historic Beltsville Reminiscent group, and they were commenting on this book called The Beltsville Show. And one of the guys that I live in Annapolis now that I've come to, you know, become good friends with, well, he was part of the original Beltsville crew. And we're now talking late 60s, early 70s. And he commented to me, goes, "Hey, Porto, do you know your dad is in that book?" And I'm like, "What?" And he's just like, "Your dad is in that book." So I bought a copy of a book called The Beltsville Show. And it's The Beltsville Show, and You Are What You Drive. And the book was written by a guy named Kerry Thomas, who I remember his name, I remember his voice, I remember him coming and going, you know, in the house. And he essentially outlines, you know, him growing up in Beltsville and integrating himself with a group of car guys. They were Corvette guys, they were Chevelle guys, they were Ford guys, and my dad. It was at University of Maryland. As the story goes, per the book, you know, they were working at the Shell. This car comes in, it was a Chevelle, and it had, you know, no exhaust system whatsoever. And he said, "Hey, I'm looking for a guy named Kerry. I heard he can help me weld these, headers onto this car." And the guy said, "Yeah, I'm Kerry." And they became really good friends. And my dad was indoctrinated into this group of gearheads. And he was the first one who had a professionally sponsored track dedicated car. So it's so cool to read through this book. You know, it's, you know, you start recognizing the names and some of the stories. And, you know, I know there was folks that passed away that my dad, you know, was telling me about. "Oh, you should have seen this guy in his Corvette. It was blue. And after the accident, it was all over the road." Well, they kind of detail some of these stories in the book. And, you know, to read it, one, it rejogs your memory, but it provided such clarity to, you know, to some of the stories that I had heard from my dad, you know, over the years.
It's living proof that those stoplights were a quarter mile apart on Route 1 as well, right? So
these guys, they had, you know, the Beltsville Shell was a service station. And, you know, back then, gas stations weren't really where you went and pumped gas. They were service stations because the cars needed a lot more care and feeding than cars today. So it was a service station by day. It was a speed shop by night. So this book, you know, outlines, and, you know, you and I grew up in the area. We knew it pretty well, where they actually had, you know, marked out quarter mile, you know, stretches, and they could block each side of the road and test their cars, test the performance, build them, break them, build them again better. So it was, it's cool, but it's been a while since I've lived in Beltsville. I moved out of the area about 20 years ago, but, you know, just to read the stories, it brought me right back to, you know, that early age and time. And then when I had my license and kind of explored how fast cars can go on the same stretches of roads, you know, doing the same thing. So,
you know, you said your dad's first Porsche was that 911S, but what was your first car?
So my first car was a hand-me-down from my dad. So my first car was a Volvo Turbo because it was a family, you know, grocery getter, but it was a lot of fun, and you know, it treated me well. The first car that I picked out and bought on my own, Paul's, was a Volkswagen GTI VR6.
Oh,
And my son, I have a 16-year-old son. He's so much like us, it's not even funny. And he is, you know, he's got his eye on the Japanese car. But every time we see one of, you know, the GTIs, whether it is an R32 or Type R, I'm like, that's you should drive one of these. You should try this. He's like, I don't know about a hatchback. I'm like, you have no idea, how much fun these cars are. That car did everything it should have done and then some. It was reliable. It was fast. When I was bored with it, there were all sorts of mods. It would float around the corners at the track. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience. And I kept that car clean. I never crashed it. And it treated me very, very, very well.
So I'm going to guess that was a Mark III or?
Yeah, it was a 1998 VW Driver's Editions VR6 GTI.
Nice. Those things are still sought after to this day. I mean, there's a huge cult following for the third gen GTIs.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. At the same time you had that, my dad picked up a first gen Corrado VR6. So I was tooling around in that in the 93 SLC, 5-speed, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And what's funny looking back, same power plant as the GTI, although the Corrado was built on the Mark II chassis, which shared some parts, there's some similarities with the Mark IIIs. Back then you're like 172 horsepower in a front wheel drive. It was like, man, even a drop of rain or you hit the paint stripe the wrong way and you do a one wheel peel. Nowadays you're like 172 horsepower. What is that? That's nothing.
Yeah. The balance of weight in those cars too is, was so precision and it was such a fun car to drive. It was my Porsche, but I didn't have a Porsche budget at the time, but it did everything. And I still wish I had that car today. And like you said, there's a cult following and I'm one of those guys. Every time I see them on the road, I'm amazed. And you see them in really good condition. People take care of those cars, which tells you something about the importance of those cars in the overall big scheme of things.
So color?
Black on black on black.
All right. You couldn't get that with the Corrado. That was so annoying. We ended up with a red one because my dad was dead set on a black leather interior, which only came in like 2 cars. If you wanted a black car, you got tan. I don't understand these combinations, but you're very fortunate. So I happen to be a 4th gen guy. It was oddly enough, I went through a similar thing where, I was buying a car and I was actually dead set on getting an SVT Focus. Yeah. And my dad was like, you need to drive the new GTI. You got to go drive it. I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of big and bloaty. I don't like it, because I was a Mark II kid. I wanted a Mark II really bad. And then I went and drove a VR6 and I was like, all right, I'm done. We're good. Have a nice day.
I like your dad.
Okay, so your GTI, your dad's got the 911, and so there's obviously an evolution there. So what came next, and what got you to the track?
So that car got me on the track. So that car was the car that I would, bring to, Friday at track events and high performance driving clinics at Summit Point, and those places. And that was the first car that I really piloted around a racetrack with an instructor and had an absolute blast.
Hear that, listeners? Fun wheel drive. He started with that.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And just a little plug for that industry. It really taught me what that car was capable of doing. It taught me what I was doing right and wrong in that car when I was driving it. I was a much better driver on the Beltway and every exit ramp, because of that experience. And when I started graduating to, other cars that had more power, that were more finicky, I don't know that I would have kept those cars on the road as long as I did had it not been for that, those track day experiences. Well, I had that GTI and, I always wanted a 911. So my first 911 was a beautiful car. It was a 1988 Carrera. Factory correct Carrera whale tail, Fuchs wheels. It was an absolutely, gorgeous, silver. They call it granite green metallic. It was a phenomenal car. It was unmolested. I bought it from a fellow named Tim Holt in Pennsylvania. Tim Holt was the driver for the Intersports cars. So he had a very boutique-y dealership, if you can call it that. He had a garage full of beautiful 911s. Most of them were race cars, but some of the regular 911s were just cherry. That was the car that I saw and I had to have. Damn it, that car became mine. So a lot of fun. The door is closed. It sounded just like my dad's. It had that burning crayon smell, just like the rest of it. It was a ton of fun. That car was even funner to start modding. When I felt that I was ready to kind of step it up and move that car in different directions, it had Bilstein coilovers all the way around. So it had a European stance. It didn't have that stance look like you see at car shows. It had a European ride height stance.
That means you can still see a gap between the tire and the fender. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly, but you got to be careful what tires you put on because that gap is very important. After that came the, stainless steel fab speed headers on back. That unleashed a lot of power in that car. That car also, quickly got a fab speed cold air intake in it. I never chipped that car. The other thing that eventually we wound up doing was doing a twin plug conversion on that car.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Two spark plugs per cylinder, then fuel rails and fuel pumps and all the other stuff. And it was reliable as can be. That car never broke down on me. It's always treated me well. I never burned through, parts aside from tires because I was going through those, as fast as we go through pancakes. Oh man, it was just a ton of fun to drive, and it made a lot of noise and made me really happy. And that car was also a monster on the track. In my opinion, limitless power, and it's just very, very predictable to drive. Still use a handful to drive, but that turned into, my track baby.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about that a lot of people don't realize. There's an allure and there's a mystique around the older Porsches, but they are a handful to drive. They take a lot of awareness and a lot of concentration and a lot of patience in some respects. The new Porsches, anybody can get them and go fast. And I'm not trying to offend anybody that's listening, but it's true. There's so many more computers and gadgets and gizmos and things keeping that, let's call it bad design, under control because of the pendulum effect that it has. It's a front wheel drive with 5 reverse gears. Let's be serious. But there's an art to driving those cars fast and driving them well. And when you do master it, it's a lot of fun. And you get in something else and you're like, it's just not quite the same, but it prepares you for some really interesting situations on and off track for sure.
Oh yeah.
There was a story you mentioned during our conference room session about a motor that mysteriously disappeared. I believe this was for your Carrera. Do you want to unpack that one for us?
So that's oh God, thank you for reminding me. So as I mentioned, the Carrera had a lot of work done to it. And when you start putting that kind of work into those motors, you start to measure the life of those motors in hours, not miles. I knew that there was going to be a need for, a new motor. So I had, Peter Dawes in Dawes Motorsports build a 3.2 liter motor, not a dedicated track motor, but a performance motor that would go in a street car that was still drivable. That motor wound up in my dad's garage, wrapped in plastic on a pallet, because he had more space than I did. My dad eventually died of cancer, but as he started to get sicker and sicker with cancer, things that were important to him, he felt good about giving them away. So a lot of tools, went to the guys that, maintain his home and his yard and other things like that. And at some point, one of these guys said, "Hey, sir, what are you going to do with that motor?" He said, I don't even know what that motor is. He said, "I think it's broken." He's like, "If you want to take it apart and tinker with it, you're more than welcome to it." And
oh man,
next thing you know, they must have come in, 2 of them, and lifted up the pallet and put it in the back of the truck. And we were there, and I think it was like Christmas Eve or something like that. I was in the garage and I came back and said, "Dad, where'd you put the motor? What happened to that motor?" He goes, "Oh, that old motor, I don't even know what car that was from." He said, "I think that was broken. I gave it to the landscapers." That was the last I ever saw of that motor and the last we ever discussed of it.
It took you a minute to get your jaw up off the floor, though.
My fault. Shouldn't have been there, but
everybody has one of those soul crushing car moments where you're just like, did that just happen? Whether it's like the new motor you built just blew up or something like this occurs, or just, anything could happen, but it's just like everybody's got a story like that, a moment like that.
It was still wrapped in plastic with my name on it. It was still wrapped in plastic. I didn't even really open it and smell it. I'm thrilled. My dad had a huge heart and, thought he was making somebody happy. And I hope that motor found its way into, something super cool. And
yeah, because it would be really hard to put it in anything. It's a flat 6. It doesn't fit in a lot of cars.
No, so I said either, what were they building, an airplane? Like, what are they doing with that motor? And I have no idea, but that was the end of it. That was the end of it.
So let's talk a little bit more about Porsches. And so obviously you joined the Porsche Club. I think we're in the same region, as a matter of fact, which is another common ground we have here. I've literally been in PCA, I think, since I was a little kid. So, it goes back as far as I can't remember. But but with that being said, so where did you evolve to from that early Carrera 911?
So after that Carrera, so I wound up selling that car. It was one of those things where, somebody wanted to buy that car and I felt they were the right owner for that car and they knew what they were getting. They understood everything that was there. And they hit that car with a paint meter and they said, it's never been painted. I said, no, it's all original. The paint's all original and the guy wanted it. They wound up buying that car. My next 911 was a 2008 911 GT3.
Oh, wow.
So again, triple black on black on black. And, that was kind of a dream come true for me because I had, watching the IMSA races and watching what GT3s do on the circuits, it's just amazing to me. And I always wanted to be responsible for something that made that kind of sound. The stars aligned and I wound up getting my hands on a black on black on black, 911 GT3. And it was, oh my God, it was a riot to drive and own and, but a different Porsche experience. It was hard to drive. It sat so low, I went through 3 chin spoilers on that car, never ripped them off, but you scuff them and you're like, okay, they're like pencil erasers, they wear down so quickly. So I would go through chin spoilers on that car. Brake pads were a lot of fun. Those big ventilated discs were kind of like cheese graters and they would just take them down but the car was a blast. I mean, the car was an absolute blast. I did not do anything to that car. I didn't mod that car at all, just because it didn't need it. It had such an even distribution of power, and it was quick and quick from start to stop. And it stopped like $1 million. And if you had a long road and were brave and you put the loud pedal down and let it eat, that car would scare you with how quickly the speedometer started to point down. And it was amazing. It was amazing to own.
So that you went from air-cooled 911 to water-cooled 911. That's a whole giant jump. No 964s, no 993s in between, nothing. Straight to the 996 platform.
My dream car is a 993, and I'm not finished yet, So when it's time for another one, I would absolutely kill for a 993 Carrera, Carrera or a 964 turbo. There's something about the lines of the 964 turbo. I think it's one of the most beautiful cars ever built. And whether you see one of those on Instagram or you see one in real life, I mean, they just seem to get better and better and better with age. And I feel that way about the 993s as well. But, those are the last of the last air cooled. One day, I hope, I'll get my hands on one of those as well.
And it's funny you mentioned that because just the other week I posted on Instagram, a friend of mine out in Washington State happened to pick up all original 993 garage kept, super low mileage in that like Merlot color they came out when they introduced them. Beautiful car. He's a Corvette guy. He's at all the other cars. And he goes, that has been my unicorn, like basically a first run 993. And I was like, man, you made it. You crossed that finish line. Congratulations. And then it was like, how do you like it? He's like, I love it. It's, it's the best thing ever. And I'm like, okay. Now I will say, I don't know that I could own a 993 because the prices are going up thanks to, and same with the 964s, thanks to Singer, right? They're taking all those cars and turning them into those resto mods and all that kind of stuff. And some of the other companies out there doing that sort of stuff. But I did get the opportunity to ride in a 993 twin turbo.
Wow.
And for me, that was like, it was right up there with like the F40 and some of these other cars where it's like, if I ever get a chance to ride in one of those, and I did, and it was mind-blowingly fast. And what's funny is it came from this desire from when I was a kid because my uncle owned a 930 turbo. And so I got a chance to ride in that with all the giant turbo lag and kicking you in the chest and everything that goes with that. And it just left such an impression that it was like, if I ever get a chance to, ride in the biggest, baddest 911 turbo out there, I want to get the chance to do it. And that was absolutely phenomenal.
So it's funny you mentioned your uncle's 930. So I too have an uncle with a 930 that's been in the family for a long time. And I remember when, he was kind of teetering on, should I sell that car? Do you want to buy it? And I didn't have garage space, but I should have bought another house with the garage and a bigger garage and got my hands on that car. That too was the first turbocharged Porsche that I had ever been in. Still to this day, you know, that's another one that I would love to get my hands on. But, you know, that was an amazing memory. And, you know, I would kill to get my hands on that car. I don't think it'll ever happen, and the prices of those are,
oh, they're out of this world, out of this world. And you know, what's even worse is if you have a slant nose, right? A real one.
Yeah.
My uncle's was converted. I won't say why it was converted, but it was converted. But it also gave way to the fact of why our 914 was converted to a slant nose. So it's all related in one way or another. I mean, so yeah, I mean, there's some really cool stuff with the older 911s. Like I said, when they made the switch to water cool, I think your GT3 is one of those that everybody goes, yeah, that's the car. I don't want to say one of the last good ones, but it's one of the last driver cars, right? Speaks that Fahrvergnügen, right? That driving pleasure that we got from the Volkswagens and some of the older BMWs, like the E30s and things like that, where now they're space shuttles. They're, you know, they've got all these computers and all this stuff. And I notice in the Porsche world, people are really gravitating towards the Cayman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the Boxster so much, but the Cayman, which I secretly laugh and say, ha ha ha, they finally got the 914 right. I gotcha. Yeah. So there's something to be said about all that. It's all about being a driver's car and that. So what was the experience like at the track with the GT3 compared to, you know, the other cars you had been with?
Well, I mean, so that's where that car really came to life. You know, that car felt at home on the track or any high speed, you know, opportunities as it did anywhere else. It actually felt more at home, you know, when you had that car at performance speed. Again, it was super, super balanced, just an amazing, you know, distribution of weight and power. You had to always be one step ahead of where you wanted to be versus where you were, because you would wind up in a bad place. The gearbox was so chunky and beefy, it forced you to think about, you know, every shift, and the clutch was so heavy. And yeah, you know, you became very, very autonomous over time, but that was a car that you had to drive and you had to think about. It didn't have the top end as a, you know, ZR1 Corvette or, you know, some of the, you know, big American, you know, cars that would be on the track too. But in the turns and the twisties, that car was butter. I mean, it was unbelievable and predictable, and you could hammer a couple curves here and there and that car would pop up and plant itself back down. And, you know, you never really had to get off the power. It just kind of, it took care of you. Just an absolute riot to drive. Horrible in Beltway traffic. Horrible in Beltway traffic.
Well, what is good in Beltway traffic?
I don't, a helicopter, I don't know. I would, on the rare occasion where I drive that car to work or anywhere, you know, and I'd get stuck in, you know, bumper to bumper traffic. When you watch the temperature gauge start, you know, and you're like, I thought there was water in this car, but my leg would be so sore from the clutch because it was such a heavy clutch. And every time you know, engage or disengage the clutch, you had to think about it because you didn't want to be that guy with the stalled out 911 on the Beltway, which never happened.
Ever.
Never.
You talked about the track a lot. So 2 questions for you, and they kind of go hand in hand. Of the ones you've been to, your favorite, and the ones you haven't been to, your bucket list.
Daytona Sports Car Course is absolutely my favorite. It's one of my favorite vacation destinations, and it is by far I think one of the coolest tracks to slide around.
So that's the Rolex configuration, correct?
Correct. Again, you know, I grew up watching IMSA car races. I grew up watching the 24 hours. It was like the Super Bowl, you know, in my house. And, you know, and it's been slightly modified over the years, but that was the mecca, the pinnacle of motorsports. And, you know, finally, when I got there to, you know, witness a Rolex in person, it was unbelievable. But then to drive around the track and, you know, feel what that banking feels like, to come off that banking into the infield and, you know, go from top gear, almost, you know, tacked out to third gear into second gear and in a hard left turn, and then underpower through the twisties again. It just, you know, you feel like Derek Bell, you feel like, you know, one of the racing icons who've spent, you know, years moving around that track. I would love to, there's 2 tracks. I would love to go around Le Mans and I would really love to go around the Nürburgring. As a gearhead and watching all of the new cars get tested to see who can, break the records on that. You can't help but watch a lot of Nürburgring videos. I watch them all. I watch, cup car races from the 90s because, hey, it's really cool. And you get to see exactly where those guys position those cars and how they position those cars around that ring. I've never been there. Been to Germany a couple times, but I've never been to the ring. If I had a bucket list, and I do, that one would be the top of the list.
Very cool. You get all sorts. The ones that surprise me are the guys that like live around here and they're like, I want to go to Watkins Glen. I'm like, dude, that's like 4 hours away.
I know.
At least give me Laguna Seca or something, Coda. I don't know. Yeah. Right. But yeah, no, that's super cool. So Mark, you mentioned IMSA, and I'm a huge IMSA fan as well. And I'm not shy to admit that my number one love is rally, but we won't talk about that because nobody likes talking about rally. So it's okay. We'll find a guest eventually that wants to go there. But IMSA is my second love, right? So I grew up in the Trans Am era, Willie T. Ribbs, Hurley Haywood. This is when Hans Stuck was running with those guys, Group 44 cars, all that kind of thing. I was always rooting for the underdog, right? Having followed Group B, I followed Audi into Trans Am and then into IMSA, where I found my second home. Our listeners can't see it, but you're a Porsche guy, but you're wearing some BMW swag. So what's going on here? You an M8, M8, M6 guy? What's going on?
No. So when I was in high school. I think I was a senior in high school. Again, this is another one of those life episodes that I'll never forget. My dad, had a Carrera, another Carrera, and I heard him in the garage, and I was always the guy that, 11 millimeter wrench, no, the other 11 millimeter wrench. So I was always running back and forth, and I started hearing him calling my name, Mark, come over here. And he had his arms, in the car in Porsche contortionist fashion.
100%.
There was an alternator that was bad in that car, but that alternator was like, 2 weeks old in that car. At that point, he had it. He was done. He said, I'm finished with 911s. These are the most expensive, pieces of shit I've ever owned. He said, I gotta.
No one that's ever owned a 911 has ever said that.
And I still disagree, but just like that, the garage was, purged of, specialty 911 tools and 911 service manuals. There were other motors that were, grenaded, that were, track motors that they one by one, they all went out. And into the garage, pulled a 1988 BMW M3.
Oh, wow.
So an E30 M3.
Now your dad had good taste. That's all I can say.
My dad, I was lucky growing up, underneath his roof and having the luxury of driving his cars because he knew how to pick them and he knew how to take care of them and he understood what they were capable of. But on top of everything else, he was more than willing to share them. As long as they were there and they were clean and I was respectful, he would allow me to drive them. And I could tell you stories of things that I did with those cars too. That was absolutely nuts. But 4-cylinder, water-cooled, front engine BMW M3. It didn't have the grunt of a 911. It didn't make the same sounds as a 911.
And your GTI would beat it off the line. So.
Oh yeah, it was anything but fast, but that car was balanced. That started a wave of M3s. So back up, when my dad was building, Chevelle motors and that sort of stuff, he also had 2 BMW 2002s.
Nice.
So he was always he enjoyed German cars even back then when American muscle was his thing. He kind of, I guess, decided I'm going back to my roots, and there was a BMW M3 in the garage, and we had a good time with that car. That was his baby, and then as BMW would release new models of the M3, he would grab them. As I mentioned, my dad, got sick and passed away, but I was driving my 911 to a meeting, and it was very, very rare that I did that. I was one exit away from the guy that I bought the car from. My dad called me and he said, hey, do you know anybody that wants any of these cars? I can't drive them. And they're all stick. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they're not doing anybody any good. He said, they're all here. If you know anybody that wants them, any of your friends that are going to hang on to them, have them give me a call. I got to figure something out. Tears in my eyes. hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, the guy that I bought my GT3 from called and he said, hey, he's like, it's Omar. I said, I know exactly. I recognize the number. And he said, you don't still have that car. I said, I do. He goes, what did you do to it? And I said, I've done brakes, I've done tires, I've done oil, and that's it. He's like, how many miles are on that car? And I said, 3,000. I think I put 3,000 miles on that car. He said, you're not interested in selling? And I said, no. And then I kind of thought about it and I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, let me go to this meeting and drop by the shop and you tell me what we're dealing with. And he had a buyer for the car. They offered me as much money as I paid for it. So I never lost a nickel. I had a lot of fun with it. The next thing was an Uber ride back to my dad's garage, my dad's house. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I think I'm here to pick up a BMW. Which one do you want me to buy? And he's like, huh? And I said, yeah. I said, sold my 911 today. Now I have space in the garage. Which one do you want me to buy? I wound up driving home his BMW E46, which was the 12th BMW imported into the United States. So he was on the wait list for that car 2 years in advance. So that was a very clean, very, very low mile, BMW. And I took his hat and along with the BMW and I don't know, they just, they're special to me because they were special to him. Not a 911, but they're special to me because they were special to him. So, and that's kind of where that came from.
So I gotta pull a couple threads on this. First of all, mad props to your dad for going BMW and not 944. I think he dodged a bullet there. Again, no offense to the 944 people, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Yep. Mechanics made a living on those cars.
Yep.
Second, you mentioned Omar. That's Omar from Intersport, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
And for any of those of you that are listening in the DMV, we all travel in very small circles here in the Potomac region of PCA. So, everybody knows who Omar is. So hats off to him if he's listening to this episode. So very cool.
I bought a few Porsches from Omar. I can't speak highly enough about the operation he runs and the care that he takes of the cars and his ability to find cars that are very, very clean, very, very special, very, very, they're doing the mother of all PPIs on those cars. So when you're dealing with him and any of his inventory, you're getting a very, very clean, very strong example of what it is you're buying. And he's a lot of fun and he's easy to work with. He's got some phenomenal mechanics under his roof as well.
So now what's in the stable, BMW or Porsche?
I have a fishing boat.
So just like owning a BMW or an E36 at least, but anyway, moving on.
Well, so I have space in my garage right now. So, I got rid of the E46. It was not the car for me. It was a lot of computers and a lot of weird things in that car. So it was fun. It was a quick car. It did not.
Was it the SMG or was it the manual?
No, it was a manual. It was
good.
A manual. So
that's all I'm going to say is good.
Yeah. So it was not an SMG car. The E30 is still in the family. So nice. That will probably be the next one that, I bring here. And it's been, the car is very, very clean. It's been sitting for a little while. So, garages and cars that sit in rubber are a terrible combination. So it's going to require some TLC and some elbow grease. That's really it. I'm without a cool car right now or a fun car right now, but soon come. I'm not sure which direction I'm going to go.
Which leads into a great question, because I got to bring it up since you're living in both camps. What do you think of the new BMWs?
Man, it's funny. I saw one on the road today and the guy made a turn and let it eat and it made a whole hell of a lot of sound and it looked like a lot of fun. It was a brand new M4. I think they're really, really cool looking cars. They're so computerized and there's so much stuff and gizmos and gadgets in them. They're not as raw as the types of cars that, excite me.
So you're okay with that front end? Are you the one person that I've talked to that's okay with that snout?
They haven't been my thing, but when you see a car and a car shoots down the road and you're like, for the first time, you're like, that wasn't, that caught my attention. That wasn't that bad. I literally had that experience today with a triple black, brand new BMW M4. And the guy, was slow to make the turn, but once he had, all four wheels pointed in the same direction, he got on it and it did make a hell of a lot of noise and it disappeared down the road pretty freaking fast.
Absolutely.
I was impressed by how quickly that car how quickly that car, vanished. But I don't know. They're okay. There are too many of them. There are too many of them. One of the gripes I have with all these cool cars today is you see so many of them, M4s, M5s, M6s, they're everywhere. AMG, Mercedes, everywhere you look. They're awesome. They're super special. They're very expensive, but there's just so many of them. I can't believe how many, cars these manufacturers are pumping out these days. And I remember when an M3 sighting was a rarity, when a 911 sighting was a rarity, when a 914 sighting, well, that's still pretty much a rarity now, but you just didn't see them and encounter them as often as you do with all this new age, space age stuff.
Yeah. They've become more available, but I also look at it from the other perspective. A lot of those specialty cars were grounded and born out of motorsport, and now they're born out of status. So it's like, I need to have an M4, and they'll take, the factory will take an M4, or a privateer will take an M4 and go racing with it. But it's not like the E30s or the 190Es or the early 911s and all the other, specialty cars. And it's like, let's call a spade a spade. We took a shit box and we turned it into a race car, and we went to go compete against the big boys, right? We were the underdog with, the evolution. Let's look at the E30. It's an evolution of the 2002 platform, right? And then they went, oh, we got to put flares on it because we want to put more meat under there. We want to compete with Audi, with the Quattro, with the big flares and all this kind of stuff. And it was kind of a sign of the times, right? But now I feel like we flipped it on its nose. And to your point, there's a SLS in everybody's driveway. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's not like, oh my God, like the Gullwing, right? Like the old ones where you're like, that's something really cool. It's really rare,
I second that. I mean, I really get into the IMSA races and go in person because there's so much of a similarity of what you see on the track and how it translates to what they eventually build for the road. Whether it's a Ford EcoBoost motor that, they're running in, a Daytona prototype car. Well, now Ford EcoBoost motors are all over the place on production cars. And a lot of that research and development, test and engineering was conducted on a track.
Oh, yeah.
And finds its way into the cool stuff, that's in the dealerships and on the lots these days. So that's what I think is amazing about IMSA racing, especially GT Daytona and the, GT Le Mans class, where the cars resemble what you see on the streets, or if you're lucky enough in your driveway.
Since we're back on that, what do you think about the current changes to IMSA with the classing, the potential merger with WEC, the lack of LMP1 cars, which is like, for us IMSA guys, it's like Formula One. That's where the technology trickles down from, is LMP, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so you guys like us go back a long way. And I remember, going to Daytona, and there were privateers, there were people who they didn't have these 18 wheelers with, multiple different cars and chassis and motors. They were, family oriented people who loved motorsports, and the diversity of the field, the diversity of the sounds of those cars was what was amazing to me, from Mazdas to Porsches to, BMWs to Audis, like there was everything. And it's gotten to be such a high dollar, cost of entry series. I wish there was a way that they could devolve back into, the pure roots of that type of racing. And of course you can go to other venues and watch other classes of racing that still have, historic cars. But when you get to that scale, to that level with those drivers, I'd love to see it, kind of devolve back into, what it used to be.
To that exact point, I've heard many people say that about NASCAR. It's like, let's bring it back to the old days of stock car where, let's be real. How many rear wheel drive Camry V8s have you ever seen on the road? They don't exist. They're all tube frames with, it's almost like an RC car. Put whatever plastic body you want on top of, the underpinnings, and away you go. Yeah. So I would love to see a stock Challenger out there, or a true Camaro or a Mustang or whatever it is, and have them go head to head. So I agree. I think more and more disciplines are that way. And of the big ones, like F1 is not like the Ayrton Senna days, Alan Prost days when I was a kid, watching that. I mean, Formula One today, it's night and day different,
Yeah. No, I mean, it absolutely is. Those cars are amazing. The performance they get out of those cars, the fact that they can stick those cars to the ground, with all of that power, and run those cars at those speeds on those tight circuits without, a yard sale of parts after a session is just amazing to me. But again, that's not an everyday man's, endeavor anymore. At one point, it kind of used to be.
Well, and to that point, let's use stock car, or let's use NASCAR as an example. I just recently, read an article, came across my desk, where they were talking about how, we already know they've gone away from carburetors, right? They've gone fuel injected. Mm-hmm. Now they're talking about doing away with the 4-speed manual and going to a 5-speed sequential transaxle, right? A totally different drivetrain configuration. I mean, they're coming into, I don't know, the 1980s now, which is great. But the point is, it's where they would go to figure out how stuff would last. It was an endurance thing, or a longevity thing. It's like, that gearbox is junk. We're going to go back and redesign it. Why would we put that in the street car if it breaks all the time? Stuff like that. And so those really fancy setups, and even for Porsche, the PDKs and all that stuff is watered down from GT racing and all that kind of stuff. So it does eventually find its way in the mainstream, but it's not the same as in the old days where they took a Tempest and built a GTO and then went to the track,
Yeah. One of the things on my bucket list that I haven't done yet is to go to the historic 24 or one of the HSR series, because those are all car guys that have acquired those cars or rebuilt those cars. They're running them, and they're running them at speed, and it's not an exhibition lap, but they're not banging into each other for all the right reasons. When I look at my calendar with family and work and everything else, and I'm like, all right, Daytona weekend, or should I go, to an HSR event, historic 24? Kind of to answer your question, I find myself getting more excited about an HSR, weekend at the track, just to see and listen to those cars, because they're very, very different than what's going on today. I mean, the difference in decibels, spending 24 hours at the track or wherever with today's cars versus, the cars of yesterday, absolutely night and day. I mean, when I go to Daytona with my dad, for days your ears would ring from the sounds of the RX-7s. I mean, those cars would go by. It was absolutely deafening. Ford Mustangs and the Camaros and the Corvettes. I mean, you would feel those cars in your chest. You could feel the cars in your chest until they got rid of the Corvette Daytona prototypes and the last version of the
CR7? The C7.
But I mean, just the thunderous, voice of that car. I mean, they're playing the American anthem as they go by.
100%.
Every lap. And now, they're so much quieter. Everything's turbocharged, and it's so much quieter, and you can literally hear the wind going over those cars if you listen carefully.
Well, just wait till they're all EVs. You won't hear anything.
I know. I mean, it's weird. So I have mixed feelings about, merging and blending all these things. Yeah. I mean, you're going to see the best of the best drivers and the highest caliber teams, which is really, really cool to see the way those guys and girls do that. You're getting to the stratosphere of spend, and cost of entry is just prohibitive from anybody who isn't the owner and founder of WeatherTech. I mean, it's very, very, very tough to get into that series.
Yeah. And to your point about the historics, I think the only exception to that rule is Goodwood. If you've ever watched a Goodwood race, those guys send it and then some. They do not care that they're out there in a $50 million one-of-one Ferrari. I mean, they're in it to win it. It's crazy.
Yeah. I see them bouncing off the hay bales and all that other stuff, but Festival of Speed, I mean, they're bringing it.
I mean, you could sit and look at a car. You could drive it. It's what it was built for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So speaking of driving cars, you said your stable's empty. You're looking at maybe something new. Let's talk about what's on your list. Let me lob you an easy one. In your opinion, sexiest car of all time?
964 Turbo would be the sexiest car of all time for me. It's 964 Turbo, wildly sexy to me. I've always had an eye for Ferrari F430s C2. I've never owned a Ferrari. My dad's never owned a Ferrari. I don't know that I'll ever, step into the Ferrari, category, but there's something about 430s just have always excited me. I thought were super cool. So either a 964 Turbo, preferably black or silver, or a Corso Rosa Ferrari.
But remember, I said your dad was a smart man. That's why he never owned a Ferrari. Right?
I know. I just, I hear the stories, and, but, in terms of, living art, that car is one of them, in my opinion.
So sexiest, but if you were the $1 million man, you had $1 million to spend on a car, you'd buy anything you want. It could be one car, it could be 12 cars, it could be 150 Crown Vics if you want it to be. Are those same two cars on the list, or is there something else just further out of reach?
No, I mean, I'm a simple guy, and that would be for me. Perfect world, somebody else's money, or if I had extra money, 964, black or silver, or
Nice.
a red 430 Ferrari. I think that would be, or both. I just think that would be such a, either or would be such cool cars to have.
We got to flip that on its nose, though. So, ugliest car of all time.
Oh man, the ugliest car of all times. That's an easy one. The Avanti. Have you ever seen one of those Avantis?
The Studebaker?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely insane. So, there is a woman who drives one of those as a daily driver around Annapolis. So I see it all the time, and it seems to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And you look at it, and you're like, what was the designer, thinking? Like, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So that one is just, it never gets better. That
was the Hail Mary for Studebaker, though, right? I mean, they had some weird cars, but that one definitely took the cake as they were sunsetting the brand. I mean, I don't know. It shares qualities and some lines with other cars, but I'm with you. I have seen some, though, where guys have lowered them and put big wheels on them, kind of do the whole, old Corvette style of, tasteful resto mods. But then you just get to that front end and you're like, what happened? It's got no nose.
Yeah, this particular one is atrocious. I mean, it has silver and gold wheels, spokes, and they must be 90 spokes per wheel. I mean, it's crazy how the poor person who cleans those. I look at it and it's got curb feelers on it. There are all sorts of gold doodaddy, accents on the car. So it really, I mean, it went from bad to worse with that one in a heartbeat. And like I said, I happen to see this all the time. It does have nice paint. They take care of it. It's clean. It's somebody's pride and joy, and hats off to them. But just absolutely.
So now I'm going to ask a really pointed question. Ugliest Porsche, in your opinion?
Ugliest Porsche, in my opinion.
You can say the 914. It's okay. I get it.
No, some of these new 911s, the new 992s. I don't love the looks of those cars. They're gigantic.
I thought you were going to say, I was expecting, and I'm sure the audience is groaning going, the 928, right? That's what I was expecting you to say. But no, I'm surprised.
And 928s are atrocious. They are bad. The newest 911s, the 992s, I get it. They're cool cars. They're 4-liter power plant. I mean, they've got, tons of power, but
and the motor mysteriously keeps getting closer to the driver every year, right?
When you open the trunk of one of those cars, where the motor is, you no longer see the motor. You see a place to put oil, you see a place to put water, and that's really it. I think that it's a sin. I mean, the people that buy those cars that are true Porsche people, for crying out loud, you're not even allowed to see the motor in that car unless it comes out of the, from the bottom.
From the bottom, yeah, exactly.
I'm baffled by that. Just blows me away.
Retro question for you. Is the 959 still cool, or was it ever cool to begin with?
I thought it was super cool. I thought it was a super cool car when they came out with that. I mean, we're going back to the, 88, 89 when that car was on the street. So, not on the street, but in the magazines. I just, I thought it was so futuristic at the time, and the amount of power that it was pumping out, and the fact that it was twin turbo and 4-wheel drive was kind of unheard of, for a Porsche. I think it's a pretty cool car. And I like that car because on the inside of that car, there's no difference whether you're in my old 911 or you're in, an extraordinarily rare 959. I've never been in one. I've seen them in person a few times, but I've never been in them. But they say they have a tremendous amount of punch, and they're just pretty predictable, fun cars to drive for those of us who are lucky enough to get in them.
I won't nerd out on the all-wheel drive system, but we'll sidebar that. But I'm just going to say Audi, and we'll move on from that. But I do want to ask another kind of question that goes with that. So if you were we got all the votes cast, and you're the last one to cast your vote, 959 or F40? Which one is it?
F40.
Really?
Yeah, F40. They're two different animals, you know. Ferrari makes race cars and they happen to make street cars too. So that F40 was really the generation of the racing, heritage, built into carbon fiber with a place to put a license plate. You see an F40 in real life, they're a lot smaller than they look in the magazine. They're a lot lower than they look in the magazine. They're tiny. They're essentially race cars. There's nothing to them. And I think that is so cool that, car manufacturer will, take that racing heritage and package it into, something that is street legal. The sounds of those cars, the looks of those cars, there's really nothing like an F40 in my opinion. But yeah, I'd go F40.
I'm okay. I'm okay with that answer.
That was the first car that I bought in Forza 7 too.
And one of these years, we're going to stop poking fun at Corvette, and it's not because we dislike them. I've had the very fortunate luxury of instructing in many a car as a coach, to include Corvettes, and I'm a huge fan of the C6s and the C7s and things like that, especially the C7. I think they finally had gotten it right, and that's just my opinion. But whatever. What do you think of the new one? What do you think about the mid-engine Corvette?
So I'm with you. I thought the C7s, not a car that I would ever own or buy, or a car that I ever thought I'd like. I think the C7s were amazing, great sound, amazing power. They certainly got it right. The new ones, I don't know. I mean, you see them coming at you on the road and they catch my attention. They catch my eye. So I think they're really cool looking. I think they need to mature a little bit and iron some kinks and bugs out, and they're going to be pretty hot. I think they're going to be pretty hot car, but they're definitely not a C7 Corvette in my opinion. They catch my attention, and shit, they've done an amazing job with those cars on the track. They're certainly proving themselves on the track. That says a lot because that technology too finds its way into the dealership.
So Mark, having gone through, racing and we've talked a lot, you do a bunch of virtual racing and whatnot. So if I kind of place this as a virtual question, if you could meet any one kind of racing legend, sit down, have a beer with them, who would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Man.
Put you on the spot.
It would definitely be, maybe a Nick Tandy or one of the Porsche factory drivers, Patrick Long. I mean, I look at these, these guys that are driving, for Porsche, because I love the cars. I'm just so envious of, of them. And, but to answer your question, Jörg Bergmeister, if I could drink some beer, it would be with Jörg Bergmeister, preferably in Germany. That guy's had an amazing racing career. He seems to be everywhere still. Just an amazing life. The life that all of these drivers, these professional drivers live, just is amazing. But Jörg Bergmeister, that would be my fellow that I drink some beer with.
I think I'm with you there, man. I would love to meet the factory Audi Group B team, Michel Mouton, Walter Whirl, Hannu Mikkola, Stig Blomqvist, any of those guys. I'll have a beer with any of them. But there's one in particular, and this is why I brought up the virtual racing part, especially iRacing. I happened to watch the video, I think it was last year or the year before, where they released the IMSA ITU, GTO Audi 90, and they interviewed Hans Stuck about it. And so he does this voiceover and they show him driving the real car and then some footage from iRacing and all this kind of stuff. And it was one of those moments where it was like, I guess, with the way we do video nowadays compared to back in the day, I felt like, I was in the room with him. It was one of those kind of experiences. And it's like, I would have a beer with Hans Stuck. Like, he seems the coolest guy in the world. He's got the longest resume, all the crazy stuff. He's been fast in every car he's ever been put behind the wheel in, and it goes back to his dad, Hans Stuck Sr., back to the Silver Arrows days. I mean, his racing pedigree is absolutely incredible. So that'd be my vote if I had to pick, but yes.
Stuck, yeah. He's had a phenomenal career and has driven many different, brands of cars as well. I mean, I remember Hans Stuck from his BMW days, driving E30 M3s and CSI BMWs even before that. So, I mean, it's just super cool.
What did it for me? It wasn't all the Audi stuff. It was in the early 2000s when he participated in their version of IROC. Remember we used to have IROC here in the US?
I remember that. Yeah.
Well, over there, they had the Beetle Cup in the UK. and it was like all these famous race car drivers, and he's out there crushing it in a front wheel drive Beetle. And I'm just like, you're the man. That's all I have to say.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I wish we had that. So I wish we could live those days again. I mean, there was so much cool history, made around the racetracks, for drivers, for cars, for fans, and maybe one day we'll get there again.
Absolutely. And, and that's really the premise of what we're doing here at GTM. That's why we're talking to guys like yourself, right? Is to continue to spread that motorsports enthusiasm, to remind people there's so much of the motorsports world and the car world entangled, and car culture, entangled in our daily lives, that I don't know how we can just give up on it. There's such great stories and memories, the freedom of driving. We talk about this throughout the show, and, you're just a reminder of all of that. And it's been an absolutely fantastic experience talking with you, and, our listeners getting to know you a little bit better, and, hearing your story and all that.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Eric. It's been a great, great conversation, and thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share a couple stories and spend some time with you.
Absolutely. And if you're out there listening, maybe you'll see Mark trackside with us this year once he picks a new car, or he'll have to borrow one of ours, I suppose, from the fleet.
Exactly. Yeah, I would love to meet you guys out there, and at a minimum, at least be there cooking hamburgers and fueling you guys up. I love a track day. So
absolutely.
Thanks for stopping by, Mark.
If you like what you've heard and want to learn more about GTM, be sure to check us out on www.gtmotorsports.org. You can also find us on Instagram at Grand Touring Motorsports. Also, if you want to get involved or have suggestions for future shows, you can call or text us at 202-630-1770, or send us an email at crewchief@gtmotorsports.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey everybody, Crew Chief Eric here. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Break Fix, and we wanted to remind you that GTM remains a no annual fees organization. And our goal is to continue to bring you quality episodes like this one at no charge. As a loyal listener, please consider subscribing to our Patreon for bonus and behind-the-scenes content, extra goodies, and GTM swag. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can keep our developers, writers, editors, casters, and other volunteers fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. Consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without fans, supporters, and members like you, none of this would be possible.